Howdy, folks. So before I get started on this presentation, I have to warn you that this will be a very long presentation, and my format's going to be a lot more different than what was last time, where I kind of paced it too fast. I'm going to be a bit more thoughtful and considerate of the words that I say and how I'm going to frame it. So keep that in mind. As you may have saw by me just flashing these about a bit, I have hedgehog mittens on. This is Frank and this is Mildred. They are quite the lovely couple on my hands right now. Yeah, lovely mittens. So I hope you all enjoy this presentation, and as a forewarning, like I said, it's going to be very lengthy and my tone's going to be different, but I'm going to try my best to deliver an effective presentation, and I hope you all enjoy it because I think it's about a very important subject. Now, oh, and also I should probably warn you that I'm going to be looking up the entire time because the presentation rubric says I have to look up and then as if there is an audience. So if my eyes are up here the entire time, that's the reason for it. Sorry about that. I can't look directly at the camera. Now, every class, there are notes being taken. Some people take their time to write down the textbook for verbatim, and others brisk by writing down the general point that they need to know. If the purpose is to understand the subject, then wouldn't the same method be applicable to understanding the human mind? There is a deep understanding of the ocean depths and the factual research of the universe, but the mind remains unfathomable, as there is barely an understanding to emotions and causes for action because it's an intangible presence. Yet, we have to live with ourselves, and it's important to understand our own decisions and how it came to be. If we spent every night, just for a moment, to reflect and jot down in a journal our experiences during the day, the decisions made and our thoughts, and maybe we might be able to understand ourselves better and reflect on the day with possibly a new perspective by the end of it. Journaling down our thoughts and embodying those emotions can be a healthy way of reducing stress. It can help reflect on certain decisions made throughout the day to find what works for a sense of well-being, and take notes that other people can look forward to and aim to as a general sense of where they want to be in life, how they can improve themselves and possibly the people around them. Speaking of notes being taken, I hope you all brought your textbooks with you to write down the information being present. Now, let's begin. Living life day to day without any outlet for bodily emotions can cause long-term stress because of the encumbering weight of the experience that remains in the mind long after the event. Everyone is affected by these experiences, and it influences these decisions and actions we choose to make onward. So it's important to address these specific moments and overcome the mental gymnastics of keeping these experiences corked up in a bottle that is the human mind. So, for instance, if you go through life, you're going to encounter stress, and this stress will accumulate, and without any outlet to express your troubles, it's going to bottle up to the point where it becomes detrimental to our productivity and our general sense of well-being. And so the sub-point that I want to make here is the day-to-day struggles to overcome. Now, with social engagements, we're going to have disagreements with people and friends. That's just going to be commonplace if you're going to be talking to other people. And this is going to be an important facet because if we have disagreements with people and friends and we don't, examine them with consideration, or we just brisk through them, we might accidentally do some regrettable choices moving forward. And there are other events that can come as a sudden shock and cause trauma. And without addressing these, we're going to have some long-term struggles that could have been easily addressed if we just wrote them down and just took a moment to just vent out our frustrations, even if it's just on a piece of paper. Like this journal, for instance. This is my personal journal. I tend to write down my struggles in here, and I'm not going to show you it because it's very personal to me. And that's the purpose of a journal. It's to have your own personal diary of sorts to write down what you're feeling. It's good for relieving that tension. And it's good to go through this routine of spending every night to write this down, especially if it's for an education or a curriculum you're trying to complete, like coursework. It's very important because it sets up that routine, and therefore you're going to get work done regardless if you have a distraction. You know this is the time to do it. And it's also very helpful for your occupation and career because if you're going to be working at a certain time limit and you have certain moments during the workday where you kind of feel very stressed out and very worn down, it's good to have this. It's very helpful to get used to the general work ethic that you're going to be performing throughout your entire life. Now, there is a long-term detriment if you don't do this, where you don't write in a journal and you just leave these burdens unvented. You'll encounter behavioral and emotional troubles, especially with other people around you, like paranoia and just a lack of general trust. And if you leave these traumatic moments and lingering pain, as in like certain events that just kind of keep coming back to you, and it still leaves you in shock and gives you like post-traumatic stress disorder, then that will lead to a host of other issues. And especially if you're just trying to converse with other people, it's very hard to approach someone who is unwilling to allow themselves to accept what has happened and just can't deal with the general burden of the issue at hand. And there's also another detriment, and that's just committing towards these required tasks, such as the routine I've mentioned earlier. There's a lack of concentration on education in exchange for blissful distraction, not just social media, but also just general creative passions, if you will, like music. That's different than just listening to music, where you're actively committing towards something that you not just find enjoyable, but you actually want to seek a career in. That's very different than just listening to music and just kind of losing yourself in the general flow, when in actuality you need to get work done and you have to fulfill the duties entailed with your occupational role in life. This distress within the mind will inevitably affect the decisions we make and may even cloud the judgment of our own character flaws that may need addressing. So, for the moment, we're going to talk about how people make decisions on a whim. And upon reflection, we can seem, this could seem more important or require more thoughtful investigation before going through the choices made. And for subpoint 1, this is going to be very clear. The choices that range from minimal change to life-changing. So, in my outline, I listed this out as the mouse in the room and the elephant in the room. Like anthill decisions and mountainous decisions. But let's start on the anthill decisions, because there is a certain general indecisiveness when it comes to very small decisions, especially if it's very inconsequential because it completes the goal that's necessary for life. Let's say like finding a restaurant to eat at. It doesn't really matter which one you choose, but it still accomplishes the role that is to sustain you for sustenance, And there is a subtle impact of poor decisions snowballing into bigger problems if we choose to not even address them. If we decide to make a series of poor decisions that just continue to build up to where it becomes a very bigger problem that's very hard to solve. Now we have to address the elephant in the room, which I propose as the hedgehog concept, which I've read in a book called Good to Great. It's by Jim Collins, and it's about good businesses becoming great businesses and how they're able to do that through something called the hedgehog's concept. Now, this is based solely on your career path in this life. It's basically around the 3 circles of what is your passion, what is your economic drive, and what can you be the best at. And if you make decisions that goes outside that circles, you can never truly be great, nor you can find the career that you want in this life. You can't really find what will not only fulfill you, but also get you to where you want to be in this life. And it's also the people who we associate ourselves with. It's very much in terms of not only marketing, as in for business, but also just for our general reputation. If we decide to be around people who may be negative influences, that's not to say that there's positive influences on being with people who you like. It's just understanding how their influence can cast over ours. So let's just keep that in mind. There's also a lack of self-reflection. That's another problem that needs examining, especially in Good to Great, where it talks about the one-way mirror, that good companies, their executive will point the finger at their workers when things fail, and when things succeed, they point the fingers back at themselves for the credit. It takes a real humble person to really feel like when the company fails, they feel like they failed inside and that they have to become better. And when things succeed, they can be modest and point to their employees, that the people who really built themselves up. That is very great behavior, and it strives for greatness. And with lack of self-reflection, there comes the inability to change, the stubbornness and obliviousness to the flaws that you have, that you will be oblivious to what the problems are, or you remain stubborn and adamant on continuing these problems, that they become a detriment to your life going forward. And this lack of self-reflection, as I mentioned, is detrimental towards social interactions. But whether through personal problems or the problems of those around us, it's very important to really address just the general environment, both socially and internally, with mental gymnastics, as mentioned previously, and just the general surroundings, the people who we surround ourselves with. And for starters, let's go for the social environment. There are positive influences with cooperation and positive reinforcement for our work ethic and our productivity. We can get stuff done when we have the right influences trying to push us forward and motivate us. And there's also the important factor of appreciating the good. It's really easy to take for granted those around you, and therefore feel like that you aren't receiving the benefits that you want in this life. Whereas with the negative influences, it will not only sabotage and stifle your creative output, but it's also going to be difficult to discern the bad, because you've always just surrounded yourself by bad people, and you can't really make that point of comparison to find the good in this life. And there's also the mental environment, as I mentioned previously, where there's a positive mentality to feel motivated to do your work, and there's also the empathy of really understanding those around you, that you can think outside of yourself and try to help others. That's a very admirable quality. And it's important to realize that even with selfishness, as I'm going to bring up with negative mentality, that it's good to have some form of selfishness, so you at least care for yourself. But that's besides the point, because as a negative mentality, there's distraction where you look at your phone all day, and it kind of just takes up time away from what you need to get done. And just general selfishness, where you can't make that leap to think outside of yourself, to feel like that the benefit only has to work for you, even if it means the detriment of others. You still have to think about other people. And there isn't a meaningful way to appreciate these positive influences, or even to discern from the negative influences, because you can't really tangibly see it. With a journal, you can, because you can write it down, and you can review yourself through the words that you write down here, how you feel about it. But there is a solution. Step outside of your daily routine and just take a moment to review what has occurred prior to now. Whether it's important information or small moments, it gives a new perspective on the day and provides optics on the decisions made, and address certain emotions that stifle the pursuit of happiness. And this is also an important fact that needs to be told. Situations don't need solutions in order to unburden the stress piled on from what the day has brought onto you, because withholding that tension causes a mental strain on the mind, and it can impair your performance on getting work done. It's important to write a journal entry as an outlet to vent those frustrations, and therefore receive some clarity in your mind to get back to work and have an unburdened output. So let's get started. Social situations. Now, with your journal, examine the problem. Think of multiple facets. Let's just pretend the problem is a square. There's multiple facets to it, or a cube, because that's a 3D form. Now, as we examine it, I want you to first vent with passion, because that is very important, to actually express your emotions out on the paper without any thought out consideration, because it's very much an emotional process. You have to really convey that in order to relieve that stress. And then afterwards, you have to look back on it with some perspective and consideration. Because once you do that, you can finally have that discussion with the person involved, where you felt like there was a lot of stress and a lot of tension in that discussion beforehand. But now you can have thoughtful listening and respectful dialogue with them in order to finally get something accomplished. And this also works for work situations, as with like just getting a journal again, examine the problem, vent with passion. But this time actually takes some analysis and motivation, which means you're going to have to not only analyze the problem, but actually actively feel passionate about it. Like your hedgehog's concept for your career, you have to feel actively passionate in order to solve this situation, because then you can have the explanation as to why you couldn't get that done beforehand or what situations you have, and you could give feedback to not only your employer but also to your company if you are that employer, and provide new ideas as to solve the situation. Even if it doesn't work, it's still another idea that you can perform that may even have better benefits overall. Now, this frustration and emotion that is performed in the journal will not only allow the mind to distress and have some composed clarity in making decisions, but it can allow yourself to actually make these decisions with some consideration and have a better outcome overall, because you have a lot more thought put into it. Because the difficulties in decision making can also be examined thoroughly by writing a journal, and you can review with a moment of self-reflection to find the outcome, as well as the morality with making this decision. So let's examine just the decision-making process, because the decisions made in the moment, such as those decisions that have to be made right on the spot, you don't necessarily have to make it on the spot. You can take a brief moment to weigh the choices. Sorry about that mistake there. You can weigh the choices as which one will be better, which one that you feel like you feel more comfortable with. And then afterwards, you can review it in your journal to see, did I make the best choice here? But also to remember that you did make that choice, and therefore you can see what you can do later on. And now, decisions requiring some time before making a choice, such as mountainous decisions, you have to really focus on certain aspects of that decision. Take even just to write periodically to make a more well thought out choice, because it's easy to really get lost, especially if you wait towards the final moments to make that decision. It's good to take some time beforehand where you feel differently throughout the day, as to see, okay, well, what do I feel more comfortable with doing? Because you're definitely going to be a different person throughout each different day, because it takes into account the emotions that you're feeling at that time, or just the general new perspective that you have from the new 2 days, because things change even in just a span of 2 days. Now, this isn't just an examination of decision making, it also is an examination of the person. It's reflecting on the decisions that you made, the outcome of said decision, and the process. Now, how is this a reflection on the person? Well, it's just reflecting our decision making processes and how we tend to make those decisions, especially if we go with our hearts on our sleeves as to making these decisions, especially if the outcome is not necessarily what we want. We have to have a reflection on ourselves and see if we're doing the right choices by just thinking thoughtfully about them. And it's also, like I said, just a reflection on the thoughts, which links into that, which is basically emotions and feelings, and also our behavior and our composure. Because it's very important to examine how we tend to act and also how we tend to feel. Because if we're feeling negatively, we have to really address that. We can't just go to bed and just pretend it didn't happen. We have to actively write that down so we can address it. And then with behavior and composure, if there is something negative with our behavior, especially in our thought processes, and we can't necessarily compose ourselves to have that discussion, we need to really write that down, look at ourselves with our clarity in our heads, and just look at it and just take it for what it is, and then see if I need to make that change. That's very important to do that, and it's very admirable. That's not necessarily a weakness. That's very strong to have that ability to see something in ourselves and then change that for the better. And now, self-reflection is basically taking the aim of making a journal. That's essentially what the journal making process is self-reflection. That's why I bring it up so much. And it's to review our daily activities and behaviors in order to review what could possibly need improvement within our lives. To bring about positive change, so it's important to review what it means to self-reflect. So, self-reflection is the ability to look at oneself and see whether there are changes to be made in order to sustain a more positive outlook on life, among creating a positive atmosphere for others to embrace. So, let's talk about just a change in our general character. are social skills, and this is something I'm trying to work on too with my therapist, and that is communication and my general personality. Because with communication, it's easy to stumble and stutter in places, but it's also important to understand that it doesn't matter when you say it. I mean, it's important to say something, but you can take your time and effectively communicate what you want to say. It's good to really have that thoughtful consideration because it shows you really care about the discussion at hand. And with your personality, it's also good to allow your mind to effectively really just convey as to what your point is without necessarily having some general moodiness or just some very weird and awkward social skills that may impair one's ability to have companionship with another person, because it's just something that's in your personality and ingrained within you that it's just very hard to effectively establish that relationship because it's just too awkward and disconnected that it does sometimes need addressing. It may be them or it may be you, but it's also good just to write that down just to see what the problem is. And it's very much a thought process, and it's 2 questions, just in general 2 questions. I could write more here, but this is just a general question that you need to ask is, who am I doing this for and who benefits? Because this also links into the selfishness idea where that you can't just do it for yourself. You have to actively think about the other people and how they could benefit as well as you. But for the who benefits, if it's an active detriment to you, if it benefits other people, then you don't have to do it. It's something that you have to really just think about. If it benefits me but it hurts other people, then maybe I shouldn't do that. And if everybody benefits, then that's a good thing. And if other people benefit to my detriment, then maybe don't do that. It's just thinking about this with some thoughtful consideration that's important. And next is a change in surroundings, is also just the people that we surround ourselves with. Is we have to ask 2 more questions. Does my work hinge on other people's opinions? Which that's a very important factor. And that's why this journal is very important, because this is just you. This is just you and your thoughts. And you can ask yourself this question, and you can have this mental figure in your head that's a representation of you, and they would say what they would actually feel on what your work is and what you're working on, and they would make that opinion themselves rather than having other people decide for you. And the other situation is if your behavior mimics those that you surround yourself with. Because I also face this problem. I have very much an adaptive behavioral personality, where basically I kind of adapt to the behaviors around me. And that's very much a survival tactic that I had throughout my early life. But it's important to realize that you have to not only establish your own identity, but if you mimic the bad behaviors of those around you, then it's then it's going to reflect badly on you. So we have to really address this and actually consider what you actually think here. You have to really write down who you are as a person and write down the choices that you made during the day, even if it was adaptive, because you have to really address this. You have to find a way to balance that out and truly find yourself in this life. And what's also important to write down is just the general environment that you surround yourself with. Is this going to be productive for me? Is this safe for my well-being? This is something that can be addressed in your journal, and you can really review with yourself that, is this good for me? Is this something that I want and something that I want to do here? And these questions can act as a method to review without influence the actions and behaviors we commit. It can allow for a proper and healthy way to live versus a destructive path that leads to upsetting outcomes. Now, let's go to the conclusion of this whole entire presentation. So, this presentation acts like a journal, and because it lets us reflect on what has been iterated. Because we're writing our thoughts and emotions so we can unload life's burdens and reduce the stress of the general day-to-day tasks, to lessen the tension of possible life-altering decisions and ease into a clear state of mind and gain a better understanding of oneself and possibly even benefit others seeking a similar solution. If only for a brief moment, and only for a few sentences perhaps, to distill the day-to-day experience on a blank sheet of paper, then there is the ability to reflect on life's moments and to look at it through another lens when it isn't even in the heat of the moment. Made a song reference there. It can be difficult to bear certain thoughts and emotions because life experiences are unique to each individual. However, you may find that certain experiences are shared among others. If Joni Mitchell can distill life from both sides in only several verses, then it's possible to write a journal that distills life that you've lived. An autobiography of sorts in only just one paragraph. I appreciate the valuable time that you've given me to listening by this. I really do appreciate you all listening to my presentation. It's very thoughtful of you, and I'll make sure to write this pleasant experience down in my journal. Thank you, and of course, stay positive. Have a good one, folks.